I've never really been one to run dungeons. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons in tabletop games for years, but I've never really been comfortable designing, creating, and developing my own dungeons as a means to tell stories and to develop characters. So when I set out to do this new campaign that we're doing, I really wanted to test myself in a way that I haven't, which is by making my own dungeon more or less from scratch and as a means of telling a story. When I created the potential storyline for Madness in the Mines, as it became known, I wasn't sure what to expect. My original plan was just to be a kind of fun little romp for the characters to test their abilities, to interact with some of the lore and themes of the campaign, but I didn't know then that it would end up, by the end of their journey through the mines and into the Sorcerer King's mansion, that it would end up to being a definitive series of events for some of the characters. Let's get into it, and I think you'll see what I mean. This is where I would put an intro if I had one. So where we last left off, our party had just departed from the city of Antinia. It's actually a flying city located in the northwestern corner of the Gashari Republic. They had left with the Countess of Avamir and the Viscount of Antinia on a train ride that will eventually bring them to the capital, Gish, in the southeastern corner. They did a little bit of shopping of no consequence, met some of the local townsfolk, again, of no consequence. And on their way there, as I said in the last video, they were assailed by some bandit elves. These elves that were on the lower class part of the train murdered some of the staff on the way, killed a guard, and then assaulted the party in an attempt to claim the Blade of the Vizier, which is the artifact that they are escorting that rightfully, in his perspective, belongs to Sevilius Amastasia, Rob, our wizard, blade singer. And so the elves came in. I remember they didn't attack Sevilius. This was some months ago, but I remember they didn't attack Sevilius. I had them avoid him, and he was the tank. So it created this really interesting dynamic where his biggest contribution is he's really hard to hit. He has a really high AC. He can cast shield, blur, at that time, whatever first level spell he had. But yeah, or no, he had second level spells. Yeah, so blur and mirror image or whatever it might be. But because the elves didn't want to attack Silvilius because they didn't have anything against him, they were trying to kind of help him in a way. He ended up just being ignored most of the fight. One of the characters might have fell unconscious, but it was mostly just a pretty easy and decisive victory. I remember that Dryden scored the ranger. He picked up a scimitar because he left his bow in his room. He picked up a scimitar from one of the elves that had been decapitated by Selena, and he scored a critical hit, and he did 29 points of damage. I'll always remember that because I was like, okay, thank you. She's still up. And Justice Chase, the Warforged, he goes, what? Because the enemies just had like 50 some odd hit points, and they were surprised by that. I don't know why. So that was an interesting dynamic, and I just said, I don't know what to tell you, Chase. Welcome to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. But they were fine, and they defeated them. So that fight happened halfway there to the city of Cragmandu. They arrived in Cragmandu and immediately went shopping, which I figured they would. They went right to the Magical Emporium because they got their advance from the Presidium. They got paid 750 gold pieces each because one little detail I forgot. Sevilius is being escorted by the party, and the Countess is escorting the blade, and by extension, Sevilius. So the party are mercenaries that Sevilius kind of hired off screen, but he was given money by the Presidium, the Congress, and now he hired the party. So that's the connection. That's why they're all there in that cart, and it centers around this long trip to put the blade in a museum. That belongs in a museum, I don't know why I said that. The party went shopping, and I knew they would, so I planted some kind of little seeds in the Emporium, and they went to the nicest Emporium in town because they wanted to see if they could afford any magic items. 750 gold is enough to afford an item or two, at least some potions. So they went, and they were introduced to the Dragon of Cragmandu, that's her voice. My inspiration for her was a drag queen that I once knew. She's an ancient gold dragon, and she is the stepmother of another elven prince, Solomayor, who died, he's lost. People assume he's dead, but Sovelius's character is still looking for him. And she was once his stepmother, and she came in towards the end of the Elven Wars that happened a century ago, and even during the Civil War, she defended Cragmandu from the Gish onslaught, but then shortly after, a treaty was signed. And so she's a major character in the lore, but she's not an important character to the party. They just like her. And so they got along with her really well. She flirted with Dryden. I don't know why I did that, but I was just having a good time kind of making Carl squirm, I guess. And so they got a few little nuggets there. They ended up, Dryden saw this really nice bow in a case, and it's a really, really, really nice looking bow. It once belonged to a legendary thief named Urzog the Grey, who tried to steal an item from the Golden Hoard that literally just sits in the back of this massive shop. This emporium it's a converted cathedral, basically, that suffices as a magic shop. And Miaza Mayor, the Golden Dragon of the Dragon of Cragmandu, Urzog the Grey tried to steal from her hoard, and she killed him and took his bow and then upped the enchantment on it. That bow is worth 220,000 gold pieces. And Dryden goes, God, I'll never be able to afford that. Is there anything I can do to work it off? And she said, yeah. She said, go ahead, if out on your travels, if you run into Gwylf, the legendary dwarven traver, come get him to join my shop, and I'll reduce the price to 7,000 gold pieces. And so he's like, oh shit, hey, I got a quest, everybody. So he got a quest there. Selena also found a crown that felt connected to her cloak. Her cloak, she knew there was something more to it, just instinctively. Hadn't talked to her or anything yet, and she found a kind of barbed crown that was somehow connected to her cloak. And the Dragon of Cragmandu told her, and she's like, how much is it? She's like, oh, it's very expensive. You're gonna need a lot more coin. I forget what the price was. I think it was 20,000 or something. So you'll have to come back for that. And she's like, because you got a quest for me, and the Dragon of Cragmandu didn't have one. So the party bought Justice got, the Ring of Mind Shielding, yada, yada, yada. And they got some other minor magical items filled up on potions. The Countess wanted to stop in Cragmandu specifically because technically there's a faster route from Antinia that doesn't go to Cragmandu, but she needed to go to Cragmandu, the Gnomish capital of the Gnomish province, because her airship prior to the campaign, a really big airship of hers that was carrying supplies and the Droskin ambassador, so a foreign country, going east, was taken down and lost at sea. And that was actually, the events of that Lion Wind Galleon going down were actually the one shot that we ran prior to the campaign, where everyone had different characters except for Justice. But it is assumed that, that was the one shot, and it was just, whatever happened there, these are different characters, and I told them as much. But we'll see that maybe that's not true. So the Countess, tells them it's going to be a little bit. You guys need to find something to do for 2 days. Do what you want. Just make sure Sovelius, stays alive. Interestingly enough, at the same time, the Countess and the Viscount, more specifically, arrange for a professor/archaeologist/weapon artificer type figure to help them out with something. So the Blade of the Vizier is going in a museum. And it's a bit awkward because by all rights, that blade probably does belong to Sovelius. But it's an artifact from war, and it was his father's, not his, and so they're putting it in a museum. As a nice gesture, the Countess of Avamere is letting this professor / she's paying for an item to be crafted for Sovelius. Just one catch. The professor / archaeologist needs to get the Flicker of Kosuth. A Flicker of Kosuth in my game is a fragment of a primordial fire god that was killed by the human gods and the human sorcerers in the Dawn War, right? A very Dawn War-like setting, that you have the four major elder primordials that rage for eons on end, and then the gods, the children of the primordials, the gods, slay their their parents. And so whenever the elder primordials fell, they formed the landmass and the earth as we know it, and Edda, and fragments of the actual proper body that are consolidated are for the Kosuth, the fire primordial, are called flickers of Kosuth. And so Vasilier, and they're pretty rare. They're really powerful. They're pretty rare. And Vasilier knows the location of one. It's located in a mansion at the bottom of a mine north of here. And he says, if you guys help me get it, I will enchant. They've paid me. I'll enchant the weapon for you. I'll send you, and you get a magic weapon out of it. Catch is, you got to help me get it. And they all agreed to it. They just said, it's kind of funny that we're putting him in harm's way when we're supposed to be protecting Civilius, but at the same time, in kind of Gish and Aramir Gishari culture, adventure is kind of the flavor of the season. It's these are the things. Adventuring is a myopic career. It's what we do. A little adventure is becoming of gentlemen and nobles alike. So, gentlemen and gentle ladies alike. So they all decide to head north eventually to the Fort Platino, it's called. Fort Platino is located near a town. It's about a day's travel. It's probably a little more than a day's. I just said a day because I was shortening things. North of Cragmandu, in the town near it, the town that its kind of auspices fall under, is a town called Still Tower. And the party had a brief conversation on whether or not to tip off the Lord of Still Tower that, hey, we're going to be going into your mine and looting the place. But the mine had been fallen into disrepair for so many years, they didn't feel it necessary, and Vasilier told them that there are bandits in the mine, and it's better to go there, clear them out, do a job for Still Tower, and then present Lord Putris Still Tower with the information. Better to ask forgiveness than permission is kind of what Vasilier suggests. And when they learn of the bandits, the party has, it's interesting, the party has a pretty serious conversation on what to do. Professor Vasilier is a pretty lawful character, and he just wants, he just says, get in there, clear out the bandits, do your, this is what we do. They're squatting, they shouldn't be there. Whereas the party says, maybe we could talk to them, maybe we could deceive them, maybe we don't have to kill anyone. And the party took the potential encounter, a lot more seriously than I had anticipated, which created an interesting tension between my plans and what they wanted to do. And I'm going to talk about that once I finish the summary. So we'll get there about what worked, what didn't work, where I thought I made mistakes, and where I thought I just did very well. So the party gets some information. They go to the Whisper. So Justice and Selena, as spies and former spies and assassin types, they have a membership / affiliation with the College of Whispers. The College of Whispers is like the CIA of the Gishari Republic. And so they visit the Whisper House and meet with the local keeper. A keeper it's a title, it's a name. It's this young gnomish woman who is the keeper of the Whisper House of Cragmandu. And that's a good get. Being the keeper of a Whisper House of a major city, Cragmandu is almost like the New York of Gishari. If Gish is Washington, D.C., then Cragmandu is New York. It's a major commerce, it's a major port, it's a lot. It's a big city. And full of little people. So they meet with them, they trade for information on the bandits. They learn that their names are the Shadow Thieves. They ask if they're connected to the bandits that attacked them on the train, whose names are the Heathens Collective. The Heathens Collective is a pretty large bandit / terrorist organization for elven liberation and equal rights, yada yada yada. Yeah, but they gain the information that it's the Shadow Thieves, kind of an upstart gang. They have a Goliath as leader. They learn one of the Goliaths that were leading them left town and headed south, and they didn't find out that much other than that. And she says, good luck, the keeper basically says. So then they leave Still Tower, or they leave Cragmandu, head up to Fort Platino, and stop in Still Tower on the way there just to kind of check things out. There they actually meet some of the bandits that are there kind of recruiting. They're at the Briar Shadow Meadery. They see Still Tower. The town is fallen in disrepair. The population's very low. It's just the part of the land is blighted. There doesn't seem to be much growing, and they go to the meadery, and it's a respite from the coldness, but it's from the depressing area of Still Tower, but it's also not all that much to write home about. So they meet with some of the local patrons of the Briar Shadow Meadery. They talk to an elf named Carlisle, who is very, very polite. Knows sees Silvilius and is polite with him and says, here, take this little coin of mine, present this to our leader Madra, who is, our leader, and she'll see if you guys are any good. The party at some point decides to disguise themselves, and I can't remember if they did it before they left or not. Also, I'm pretty sure Carlisle walked up and introduced himself because of Silvilius. And they really liked Carlisle, and they met with some other people, and so even though the party disguised themselves because they wanted to disguise Silvilius more than anything, because they were nervous about what that might mean. A bunch of elven bandits seeing their not their lost prince, but the once prince of the Aramir. And so they decide to disguise themselves. They do really, really well on the disguise checks, and they're ready to go. So when they approach in the middle of the night, there's some things they don't know. So they approach in the middle of the night, and the scout, I roll right away, because they're going to try a more peaceful / deceptive route. I just thought they were going to go in, knock heads, I was all ready for the fight, and I'd been practiced, and I'd really, so I was kind of tunnel visioned a little bit, but I was going to say, whatever the dice say, I'm going to go with. So I roll the kind of investigation for the scout, Precissa. She rolls a 19. 19 plus 3, I think it was, 3 or 4, 22, 23. And that beats most of and she has dark vision, she can see fine in the light, in the darkness. So that beats most of their disguise. So she sees their disguise. Now, unbeknownst to them, she had a little bit of magic. She uses her message cantrip to tell Madra, hey, these guys are disguised, but, let them in, let's see what's what. And Precissa was in an uneasy position because Madra was becoming less and less reasonable. So they get 2 people into the gate. They say you can send 2 people, and they send in Justice and Selena. Justice and Selena go in because they're spies. They're supposed to be good at this, and they tell the party, we got this. This isn't our first rodeo. They meet Madra. Madra rolls a natural 20 on insight to check their deception, and they try to deceive. They say, hey, we're just here for work, we're out on the lam or whatever. The party didn't think they were being deceptive. They're like, we said we were here for work. That's technically true. I'm like, that's not how lying and truth telling works, but okay. So Madra rolls a natural 20, and at that point, Madra, because of who she was, attacks Justice. She begins to cast Inflict Wounds, and she is a death cleric / I used the cultist template, and I added the death touch channel divinity, and she's about to do like 35, 40 points of damage to Justice. So I say, everyone roll initiative. She starts to cast Inflict Wounds, I roll the damage, I am ready to she is gonna go right for Justice. Selena beats Madra's initiative by 1 point, slams her staff on the ground, casts Thunderwave. A gunpowder barrel that I had placed just kind of, that the bandits were going to use offensively, they were going to throw it over and shoot it, was placed right there. The Thunderwave slams Madra back into it, and it explodes, right? And then there's a huge fire, and they decide on their battle call Mint and Julep, because the game has kind of a southern theme. And so Selena yells, Mint Julep! And the fight's on. They defeat Madra, they defeat Bertie, who's the Goliath leader that they had apparently heard about. And then once Bertie is down and Justice actually kills him, does him in, the elven bandits that are there, put their weapons down. And they say, let's talk this out. We didn't want any part of this. This is too much. We don't want to die for this shit. They talk to the elves. The elves tell them basically we're veterans. We were here because we were put out of work. We were promised, we went to the war, the Great War, the World War, and we came back and we were promised land and gold. We didn't get it, and we've been, stealing and looting ever since, living on, there's not like there's a lot of work out there. And so they say that, and they say, we've been trying to get in this mine, stuff from in this mine. We found a golden door, and, it's a fucking cursed, wretched place. And there's a patron that was paying Madra to kind of try to break the door with some kind of dark magic. And so they're like, we don't want any part of this, please, just let us, we're just going to go and call it good. And they say, tell your tell your friends back at the inn to kick rocks. You can go. And Precissa is the leader. Precissa says, we're going to head north to Cardoon. Cardoon is a slave republic, a slave state and a magocracy. It's not the greatest place to go to, but they said they've burned all the bridges they can, and they're just going to head north to Cardoon and try their luck. So the bandits leave and presumably return to Still Tower and kick rocks out of town. The party decides to sleep in the mine. Sleep out just outside the mine. They loot what the bandits had found. Dryden finds a quiver with a snake on it. It's a minor magical item. Allows him to add a D4 poison damage. It's also cursed to his attacks. A D4 poison damage to his attacks, and when he rolls a 1, it will bite him for a D6 poison damage. Whenever he attempts to pull a quiver from a different arrow because he doesn't want to take the gamble, it will also bite him. It's a cursed item. I borrowed it from a menagerie of cursed items on Reddit. You should go see that post. I'll try to put it down in the description if I remember, but we'll see. Dryden gets that. They get some gold, and they rest in Fort Platino. A funny scene happens where the fire is raging, and they're like, "How do we put this out? This is gonna get awkward. It's gonna burn us. We can't." And then Selena sits there and she's like, "Oh, I have create water," and she casts create water and puts out the fire. So the party sleeps. Over that night, while keeping watch, 2 things happen. They hear maddening whispers in their head while they sleep. They get a good night's sleep. They benefit from an extended rest, but I have them all make wisdom saving throws against a madness effect. And what I did was I took the rules for madness. I said whenever they take an extended rest or a short rest or spend a long time in any one location, they're going to have to roll against a wisdom. I think it was DC 12 or 13. It wasn't very much. And whenever they fail one time, first time they fail, it's a short-term madness effect. The second time they fail, it's a moderate or long-term, whatever they call it. The third time they fail, they are going to receive a permanent madness condition. And only one person got that far. And we're going to get there. So, Professor Vasilier and Selena fail their madness checks. Professor Vasilier rolls a 1, which I decided on the fly is going to bump him up to a more long-term madness. So he was blind for a while. He was blind for a little while. Quite a while. So he's already at long term. And Selena fails, and she wakes up eating offal and dirt and fungus that is on the floor, on the ground in Fort Platino. And but no one bats an eye at this because they just think, she's a druid. But when Vasilier goes blind, it gives everyone pause. He's like, did you hear all those voices? Also, so they know that this place is cursed, haunted, whatever have you. At the same time, in the middle of the night, Gilly, while on watch, sees from the direction that Still Tower is in a beam and fiery pillar. A pillar of green and infernal and fiery flames that shoots off into the sky and gives them warning. Pause. Makes them wonder what is going on over in Still Tower. They saw that Still Tower was blighted. They had learned that Still Tower, the town of Still Tower, was named because of the Tower of Still Tower. The Tower of Silence, as it is, or the Still Tower, as it's called, which is this large obsidian tower that the town was built around, that used to belong to a cult of dark wizards, that the family, a gnomish family, went in, killed the dark wizards, and took over the town. The government of Gishari attempted to destroy the tower. They were unsuccessful, and they've just been inhabited ever since. The Still Tower family. The current resident is Lord Putris Still Tower. He doesn't have any family, no known heir, and they're starting to suspect that Lord Still Tower is up to no good. So the party sees that in the middle of the night, and they kind of talk about it a little bit, and then they press on. When they try to enter the mines, a quick little fight with some zombies and some skeletons ensue. They quickly subdue them. It's not a very challenging fight, and they move on through the mines. They see the closed down, the old equipment, old bones. They get some loot, a little bit more gold, and they find a journal. The journal belongs to Foreman Biggledew, the foreman of the mine of Fort Platino 115 years ago. In it, he details his day-to-day work schedule, his life, and then it's pretty clear that he starts to go crazy, and he's still writing in his journal, and he believes he's being sabotaged. That's why the mine is running dry. He thinks that people are out to get him, and that it's another gnome, and that there's a murderous gnome in here. And so he finds a magical dagger somewhere in the mines on one of the digs, and this dagger helps him kill. And he eventually slaughters his crew and then flees, and that's the last entry. He says, they're not going to get me, and that's the last entry. And they're like, shit, this place, no wonder this place is haunted, some shit, but it would appear that the madness has always been there. It's been there for a long time. This mine, whatever's beneath here in the Sorcerer King's mansion, or whatever it is driving people crazy. And they hear the whispers still. Justice reads about is told about the magical dagger, and he goes, oh, really? And so he's looking out for that dagger. He starts checking out every room and everything, and he's just all over that. And he's like, well, maybe it'll be in the Sorcerer King's mansion, or whatever. So they eventually break into a temple. The temple that was constructed as form of Biggledy, or they either found or constructed. I remember I changed it a couple times, but basically this temple that collapsed. Yeah, they dug it far enough. They found a temple. The temple floor collapsed, and then they went down, and there was a golden door. And the golden door was sealed still. So while he is opening that door, the madness gets any stronger. It's Justice who ends it. He's the scout, and he's everything. He gets more and more, and he has to make a wisdom saving throw. Fail or succeed, I don't remember. But what I do remember is that he received visions. Visions of a woman talking to him, a woman he did not know and had never seen. A woman asking him, do you know your mission? Do you understand what I've asked you to do? And very briefly, the events, hints and clues and visions, snippets from the one shot that we ran where they boarded an airship. It exploded. They fell out of the sky. They landed on a strange island, and they ended up jumping off of a waterfall to escape a bunch of snakes chasing them. And that was it. It ended on a cliffhanger. And then they all realized that maybe that one shot, even though the airship did really go down, that maybe that one shot, the Justice that was in that one shot is the Justice now sitting here. But they don't know that. The characters don't know that. The players are getting a sense of it, though. And Justice is like, oh man, it might have been me after all, So, they go to the golden door, which is written in vile script. I used to be called dark speech, I think, back in 3.5, but this is basically my take. I call it vile speech, vile script. I try to avoid using the word dark and black, you know what I mean? So vile script, vile speech, whatever you want to call it. Vile script is written on the door. Vile script was the language of the ancient Sorcerer Kings, because they were wretched, and most of them were evil. Professor Vasily reveals, he's a scholar of the ancient cultures. He can read vile script. He's a nerd to its effect, and he can speak vile speech. He tells everyone to close his ears. He speaks a single word of it, and the door opens. Prior to that, Gilly, who has comprehend languages, is like, oh, I'm going to read it. Hey, I've got, she's trying to show off. She's like, I got comprehend languages. Why study when you need to? And as it turns out, vile script and vile speech doesn't react very well to level 1 magic. And so she made an intelligence saving throw. She failed. She took 2d12 damage, 19 points of necrotic damage. And she was like, holy shit, That was a lot of damage. I'm like, that's a vile script. You shouldn't try to read it. And so she was like, dang, all right then. They all make their way into the foyer. They get past the foyer, and they meet the automatons. I use Clockwork Watchmen and Clockwork Huntsman from the Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts. Fantastic book if you don't have it. Go out and buy it right now. It's full of great, deadly, interesting monsters. Most of them are very, very well balanced. Really good stuff. And I've used so many monsters from there for this in the few sessions that we've had, and every single one of them has just been great. The party didn't fight the Watchmans because they deceived him. Because the Watchmans at first glance thought that Dryden was their master, or that someone was their master, and Dryden just played it off and rolled well enough that he deceived them and they moved on. They rested in the foyer, and they were all required to make wisdom saving throws against the madness effect, I believe. And yeah, so then Gilly failed. Everyone else was fine. And Professor Vasilier, who actually is a wizard and has proficiency in saving throws, failed again and received a permanent madness condition. Now, the permanent madness condition was worded in such a way that I didn't think it was going to come up, and it still hasn't. But we'll get to that. Gilly, however, received a madness condition that required her to do whatever people told her to do. She became incredibly agreeable, and Alexis, my player, played it off very well. And so, no, the characters didn't know that. The party did, but they didn't metagame. It was all pretty fine. So they make their way past the foyer. They examine kind of the fallen parts of the mansion and see that a lot of it's been fallen in and whatnot and destroyed. They make their way through the foyer. They get past into a maze. They fight some skeletal minotaurs who might have been alive at one point, but only their skeletons remained. And then they they defeated the minotaurs, and then Civilius got pulled into a wall. The minotaurs could just go. It was all gold. The whole mansion was gold, and the minotaurs could just make the walls like transmute them on the fly and pull you into them and try to suffocate you. But Selena pulled him out of there by activating her cloak, unbeknownst to her, and becoming temporarily like phasing and just getting Civilius out of there. And then they all went into the final room, which was the room of the lonely keepers, I called it. They were greeted by a clockwork myrmidon, again from Tome of the Beast, and a spectator from the Monster Manual, which is a tiny little beholder. It was hidden from them, and there was another invisible creature in the room that they got to later. The spectator took on the guise of Orgulflagon, who was the beholder sorcerer king of old, whose mansion this was. He told them, I'm still here, and I will, and I did this whole voice. I could try to do it. I don't know. I was like, what did I was like, leave this place. You have entered, and that kind of thing. And it put them off because they realized that like if a living creature, a living, intelligent, conscientious creature is still living here and this is their house, then we are in the wrong. He tells them to leave. Gilly tries to leave, but realizes there's not much of an exit in this treasure room. And they're like, get back here, Gilly. Why are you being so weird? And the fight ensues. The fight. So Gerflagen, who was pretending to be Orgulflagon, had cast Enlarge on himself. He had about this much magic. I think he used it like an enlarged scroll, actually. And he, appeared with a billowing cape and a clockwork amulet, and his clockwork myrmidon activated with his massive sword, and they started the fight. Dryden very quickly did enough damage to knock his concentration, and Gerflagen's concentration broke, and he was reduced to a tiny little spectator. Like, oh, he's not a beholder. And they all thought, whenever he was revealed, they all thought they had fucked up, and they were about to fight a beholder, and they were shitting their pants. But it turned out he was just a spectator who had cast it. He used a scroll. I remember he had 2 scrolls of Enlarge. He used one on himself. And the other invisible creature was just off in the distance. So, they get into a fight. Selena goes unconscious. Gilly gets knocked down. Like I said, he had that clockwork amulet, and this clockwork myrmidon, you should look at it. Clockwork myrmidon is a great CR6 creature. Does a shit ton of damage, has interesting abilities, lots of HP, good armor, intelligent. Like, it's good, great monster. So they're panicking. They're like, how do we get this thing down? And have we done any damage to it? They were doing a lot better than they thought, but it was just like so intimidating. So Velius gets the idea that the clockwork amulet that was on the spectator controls this thing. And so the spectator was hit with such a blow that he was knocked back onto the trade table that he was hiding, and a shimmering field separated them. But the shimmering field was only described briefly, so, So Sevilius calls out to the group to, hey, get that amulet! Everyone ignores him, except Gilly. On her turn, because of the madness effect, she just said, it came to her turn, and none of us, it's a fight. I'm managing all these little riders and things and rolling that and seeing this, and no one's paying attention. On her turn, she said, I get up. She got knocked down, I think, by some grease effect or something. And she says, I go over and I reach my hand in and try to grab the amulet. I say, and so this is a disintegration field. And I say, you need to make a dexterity saving throw. She makes it. She rolls 2 natural 20s. I forget. She was Skyping in, so she was rolling everything on roll 20, and everything rolls with advantage on that. So we saw it was like 2 natural 20s, right? And so her hand goes in. She takes half damage, 44 points of force damage. I think it was 10d10. 44 points of force damage halved to 22. And I say, Gilly, you reach in your hand, you pull it back very, very quickly, and the pain kind of knocks you out of your madness, and you have lost half your hand. And everyone goes, holy, because, and Sevelius is like, oh, and Rob too, he's like, oh. He's like, and then I think someone says, you don't have to get the amulet, never mind, Yeah, but that damage was enough to snap her out of her madness, because I didn't want her to try to crawl under the disintegration field, or kill her character. But she lost half her hand. The Clockwork Myrmidon went down briefly after, and when the Clockwork Myrmidon dies, it explodes, and that explosion almost takes out Sevelius, takes out Selena, doesn't kill her, but knocks her unconscious, and the grease that had been lights up, and Justice pulls her out of the grease fire, puts her out, pops a potion in her mouth, everyone's good. Damaged, but good. Everyone took some damage. Everyone was looking rough, to say the least. And they're only level 4, mind you, so not a lot of resources to pull from. No mass cure wounds, no mass healing word, heal, any of those kind of things. Just a few healing words, a few cure wounds. Some good berries. The fight's over. But Gilly, snapped out of her madness, remembers that there's still that invisible creature lurking about. And she casts Detect Thoughts to try to suss it out. That works. The creature, which had invisibility on himself, casts Dispel Magic because he actually had Detect Thoughts prepared, so he knew what she was casting. Casts Dispel Magic and ends the Detect Thoughts. The creature is revealed to be a kind of a Warforged prototype, a very large, almost Goliath-sized, Warforged prototype, old and ancient, and more metallic and heavy, named Cthulhu, or that they called Cthulhu, because when he walked, it was Cthulhu, Cthulhu, Cthulhu. Cthulhu is the remnants of a sorcerer king, Orger Flagon, whose mansion this belonged to. The consciousness transfer went wrong from the beholder's body to this Warforged, and has left him in his current state, and unable to get out of his mansion, a fraction of his former self, with memories of a world that no longer exists. Shattered memories. I remember the session ended there with him being kind of revealed, and Gilly in shock, kind of playing to her character. Alexis says, I was playing mostly to my character. I was in shock, so I got really, and she got really combative with, and I'm in shock, and but she also said, I think I was trying to manage the situation a bit too much, not as trusting as Gilly would have been. But she went, really went at Cthulhu, and he pointed out to them that, they should have left or tried to leave. They had no right to kill his one and only friend, the Spectator, and, but he saw in them a chance to escape. If they got in, he could get out. And so he was being very diplomatic. So that kind of concluded the madness in the minds portion of the adventure, as I called the episode. And I think that's enough as far as the replay. Do I want to talk more? Let me think real quick. Well, that's so they talk to Cthulhu. They decide, he has as much right to live as anyone else. They kind of decide on war. Justice is very adamant about this because he sees a Warforged, and he's a bit of a Warforged supremacist, I guess you could say. Not Warforged supremacist. He sees his kind, something like his kind, and he wants that person, that person to live. And he says, and they all decide basically at the end of the day he has as much right to live as they do, and they get the flicker, they get everything off the trade table, and then once they do that, the mansion starts to rumble, and the floor collapses, and they all have to escape, and they do, with magic and whatnot. And Cthulhu, I remember Cthulhu saying, "Oh, the trade table's cursed, that if you take all the items off of it, the mansion collapses. Did I not mention that?" He said something like that, all snarky. So that was madness in the mansion. And that took and everything I just told you from the beginning of the Countess's dining room all the way to the conversation with Cthulhu and their exit took about 3.5 to 4 hour sessions to complete. The exit of the mines actually started off the next arc in the next campaign diary. I'll talk about it. The episode titled "Killer and Me," which took about 2 episodes to finish. So So I condensed about 10 hours into a little less than an hour. Now I'm going to talk about what worked in all of that and what didn't work, what I do differently. And so hopefully then you can take part of that and run with it and take what I've told you and improve your own game. Because I would rate overall the initial storylines, the initial little event, successful. So what worked and what didn't work, right? What worked as far as once they got to Cragmandu would be the shopping. I knew they wanted to shop, and that's good because players like to collect magic items, and they like to collect gold, and they like to spend their gold on things that they want. And so using that to pepper in potential threads and arcs and storylines is a very good thing to do. It has a quality of finesse, it has a quality of verisimilitude when you do it correctly, and it excites the players because at the end of it they can see their reward, they get a sense that it's powerful, and they have a relatively good idea what they need to achieve it, right? So Carl, the player that I kind of chose to do this for, he's a bit of a munchkin, right? He likes to roll dice, he likes to do damage, he likes to maximize and optimize. He hasn't really optimized his character, he just plays one that does a lot of damage, a hunter ranger. And so I knew that he was going to have the quest in the shop with Mesa, and that's why Mesa kind of paid a lot of attention to him. She had the bow, she had a somewhat of an idea of an objective for him, and that really worked for him, and that got him excited, and that worked. That was definitely something that worked. What didn't work is I didn't anticipate, and I don't know why, but I didn't anticipate Selena, Liz, the druid, wanting. She's like, "Can I have a quest too?" And I don't think it's really anyone to blame. It's just like it was just a moment where I was like, oh, they all, they kind of all were at that point looking for things. I remember even Gilly the Druid spoke up. She's like, is there anything here for bards? And I'm like, no, not, no. So I thought about that later and was like, oh, could I have done anything differently? And all in all, no. Might have managed it better in the moment, but I remember being caught off guard. And whenever I'm caught off guard, I always wonder, what did I do versus what did they do, and is there anything I could have done differently? All in all, when my druid asked for that, I just felt it was fine. I did create kind of something on the fly, and now it's led to something later, which I'll get to in the next campaign diary. So that was definitely a good moment. Them, they were really excited by the dragon. They visit her all the time. There are other shops in Cragmandu, but they only go to her because they like her. And that little quest of his is still eating in the back of his mind. He's looking for the legendary dwarven trader Gwylf. But he also has a sense that it'll be a kind of a later down the road thing. But he can always circle back around for it, right? After that, meeting Professor Vasilier went fine. I remember it was towards the end of a session, so the whole meeting was a little bit rushed. They didn't really ask a lot of questions. I think they were just, I think as players, we were so ready to fight with these characters in a real fight, and they could sense that, and so they just agreed to go to the dungeon, right? They're like, yeah, we're ready. I want a magic item, want these things. And there wasn't a whole lot of conversation given to this idea of like, why are we going into a dangerous situation when we're supposed to be protecting him? Someone mentioned it later, but all in all, as I've said before, it's explainable within the game, and it's fine because this is Dungeons and Dragons. We're here to kill stuff, knock down doors, and collect loot. And whatever excuses we have to make for ourselves, whether they make sense or not, it's fine. It's fine to go to a dungeon in a game. So the introduction with Vasilier worked, and then when they went to Still Tower and on their way to Fort Platina, when they passed it up, they did a lot of research. They tried to find a lot of information at the Whisper House about the bandits, and that was all good and well. I just didn't feel like there would been a lot of information because they were a pretty minor bandit group. They weren't like the Heathens Collective, which is this large kind of sophisticated revolutionary organization, whereas the Shadow Thieves were just some veterans who were occupying a mine. They were supposed to represent something, and they did. And I applauded the party for wanting to talk it out or infiltrate the bandits rather than just face them head on. That was really cool. However, I didn't anticipate. I don't know why. Looking back, I think we'd been playing a certain way for so many years in that group that I just thought it'd be more of the same. But they really took it very seriously. and they really made that moment come alive. I remember I could have communicated the the kind of I might have had them roll an insight or something to see if the scout had spotted their disguise, or I kind of rushed the beginning of the encounter. I do remember that, and although I was being honest and straightforward with them, I remember they all kind of were a little butthurt afterwards. And some of that is them, but a lot of that was on me because I rushed it. I rushed the encounter with Madra because it was getting late and I wanted to start the fight, and the scout Precissa and Madra had rolled so well that I just got it going. And so you should always, never get tunnel vision as a DM, I think, is the takeaway from that. Never get tunnel vision. Never fall in love with your plans and your scenarios, because the players are always going to view the scenes that you construct way differently. And you only need to understand the NPCs that you have, their motivations, their goals, and their skills. And that is all you need to know as a DM, and you need to have that play out organically rather than kind of have a plan, have a vision of how it's going to go. Because the players view your scenes differently, they look at the maps differently, and they interact with the NPCs differently than you envision. So that's something I can always remind myself, and as DMs, I think we need to be mindful of. Other than that, another good moment was the payoff on the foreshadowing. So like I said, when they were in the Briar Shadow Meadery, Justice had made a comment about Vasiliar's augmentation and all the pieces that were missing from him. He's supposed to be this successful archaeologist and adventurer, but he's taken some damage. He's taken there. And so Justice pops off on the mouth and says, oh, I can tell you're good at this. All the things that all the pieces you're missing, that was implied. So Vasiliar just goes, you've done this as long as I have, you'll lose some things too. And so later, when Gilly loses her hand, half of her hand, and becomes Gilly Half-Hand, that moment of foreshadowing felt so good and so right. And it felt all the more right because I hadn't engineered that situation. Whenever Vasiliar said that, I didn't, like I said, I didn't cheese it. Like the Myrmidon didn't toss her in there. I didn't construct specifically this idea that someone was going to lose a hand, someone was going to get hurt, I just put all these pieces together and they kind of organically created this scenario, and that felt really good. And I really feel that is how things should go. Sometimes you're going to force things because you feel it's appropriate. But you should do that gingerly. You shouldn't always want to force moments. Organic moments that happen as a result of dice rolls are what D&D is about. And that's why when Gilly lost her hand, it was such a good moment for the campaign. Even though it was a negative thing, it was a source of adversity and storytelling. And when it's the dice that do it, of the pieces that you construct in a narrative, that is Dungeons & Dragons. That is the heart of Dungeons & Dragons. And that is probably the best takeaway from Madness in the Mansion. The Madness mechanic as a way to regulate short rests and a way to keep the action moving and to create this kind of suspense and randomness was a really good call on my part, and I totally encourage other DMs to borrow it. I'll put the link to the Madness rules if you can't find them. They're in the SRD/compendium on Roll20. They're easy to find, and it's just it's like a wisdom save DC for a low level party. DC wisdom save 12 or 13. When they fail, they get 1. When they fail twice, they get the next category. When they fail 3 times, they get permanent madness. You should only expect to have maybe 2 or 3 rolls at most in this dungeon. I worry about a long-term dungeon using this mechanic. Maybe lower the DC to 8 or something. Just something really low, just something to kind of be there. Be DC 10 or 11. But yeah, that was definitely what worked. Was the madness effect, disintegration, having players that are willing to go there in the moment, and then in the end, risk it all for to stay in character. And that was really cool. Other than that, Cthulhu the NPC was something I added in last minute. And that sense of tension and argument about Cthulhu and what to do with him, there was a lot of people that the group really pretty much felt like he should be free. Gilly first raised some objections, but then backed down. And they had a couple weeks out of game to think about it. And they all basically decided that Cthulhu deserved to live. Obviously, with the campaign being called Ghost in the Machine, I'm trying to say something about putting a ghost inside of a machine-like creature. But that, that just I was able to know his motivation. So that I think that should be everything. That was the madness in the mansion, and it was a fun little romp. And the dungeon, I would do another dungeon again, and I'm sure they'll find their ways into some kind of dungeon. I've got a couple ideas for potential dungeons, and I think it shows that dungeons are a device of storytelling in this new kind of era of narrativist Dungeons and Dragons that we find. Dungeons are at their best when they allow for player agency and choice, move your narrative forward, and risk the player's life. And by the end of the dungeon, by the end of Madness in the Mansion, the players had learned some things about the world and the lore, both present day and in time immemorial. They learned things about each other, and they made choices that forever changed their story and narrative, both with the what they chose to do about Cthulhu, giving Cthulhu over kind of to Vasilier's charge, especially the madness that happened to Vasilier, the permanent madness, was yet to manifest, and the loss of Gilly's hand. And Sovelius' choice to, in the moment of battle, call out something like that, and that resulting in the loss of Gilly's hand, is something he will try to rectify later. Why it matters especially that Gilly lost her hand is because she is the daughter of the Baroness of the Meadows. In a city called Bridgeton, high in the peaks of the Elmantine Mountains, the halfling capital of the largely halfling province, Bridgeton. Excuse me. The halfling city Bridgeton in the province of the Glide. On the peaks of the Elmantine Mountains, there is a barony called the Meadows. It's a suburb kind of ish / neighborhood of the city of Bridgeton, and Gilly is the inheritor of this, and her parents are very protective of her. And they sent her, and she's been sent out on this journey to kind of learn more about the world and to explore and to be a bard and write stories. And she's approaching this campaign, the character is, in a very, wide-eyed and dewy kind of way. And the fact that she lost her hand in those circumstances, and she has this permanent scar on her body, and that she will have to travel home and face her mother, and Gilly's the most important thing in the world to her, face her mother and her parents, and with this symbol of the danger of the career that she's chosen, is going to be quite the source for drama. So those consequences, what happened to Gilly, what she has to face, what Sovelius has to face, and how we got there is what I mean when I say a kind of the dungeons need to be a device of storytelling. And at their best, that is a dungeon at its best. They went into that dungeon different. They went into that dungeon one way and they came out another way. Best manifested at the most obviously manifested at the loss of their hand, less obviously manifested at the permanent madness condition and other minor things. And the way they got there, their journey along the way in that dungeon, from the town, the journey to the town of Still Tower, the conversations with the bandits, the journey into the mine, and everything. Even though those obstacles and the adversity was mine to make, their choices when faced with that adversity was entirely their own. And those choices have developed their story further. And a dungeon that you make and want your players to go into and spend time out of their day to do, if we're all taking this seriously and all trying to accomplish something that we all enjoy, I think that a dungeon that does that is worth it. A dungeon that doesn't is time wasted, or a good walk spoiled. Or is that golf? So that's the video, everyone. Let me know what you thought. It was a bit of a long one, obviously. As we go further, these videos will get shorter, and I hope to do them either immediately after the sessions I have in my in my game sessions I have in my game, or shortly after. So they'll be shorter than this. I'm kind of recapping everything, going over a lot, trying to hit the biggest moments. But let me know what you thought. Let me know, and if you like the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all those things to help me move further. I would love to make a full-time thing out of this and just contribute to the growing community of Dungeons and Dragons and the content creators and things like that. Yeah, and follow me on Twitter. My Twitter will be in the description, and follow me there. I'll post new videos whenever I and everything, and you can keep up to date. And I post little snippet advices things that have gotten a lot of traction and notice in the past. So you'll get some good quick little advice and daily tips and things like that. So yeah, next video is going to be the campaign diary for Killer and Me, and that is when things start to get a little more intriguey, a little more crazy, and I hope that you guys enjoy that video as much as we enjoy playing through this story. I'll see you then.